The Munsters, a movie that no one asked for, which probably shouldn't have been made, and I don't say that joyfully. Being a creator myself and knowing how much time, effort, and work goes into even the worst projects, I don't enjoy crapping all over someone else's art. But when a movie has as few redeeming qualities as The Munsters, it's hard not to. For those of you who don't know, this movie was written and directed by musician and horror director Rob Zombie, of whom I'm a fan. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the plot later in this review, but don't worry because there aren't any major spoilers, and I don't even know if it's possible to spoil an egg that's already this rotten. It's Rob Zombie's first PG-rated film, and I imagine his reason for making it, despite the genre being sort of outside of his wheelhouse, was as a passion project since he's a self-confessed Munsters fanatic from the time he was a kid. The show even inspired his biggest musical hit from back in '98, Dragula, which I remember owning on CD. The name comes from Grandpa Munster's drag racer in the series. But although Rob Zombie knows the show inside and out, which he's expressed and proven through multiple interviews over the years, his fanaticism didn't translate well into a movie for the big screen, or even the small screen for that matter. It was originally supposed to get a theatrical release as well as being available on the Peacock platform for some reason, but was moved to Netflix after a lot of criticism from fans upon seeing the first trailer early this past summer. Universal probably knew they had a dud on their hands, and rather than putting it in theaters knowing it would bomb, they probably decided to cut their losses and accept an offer from Netflix, which is pretty disappointing because I'm sure a lot of work went into it and it would have been nice to see it succeed. Being a Munsters fan myself, having watched reruns of the show on Nick at Night as a kid, and being a fan of Rob Zombie, I really wanted to like this movie. But I had a feeling I might be disappointed, and unfortunately that feeling was accurate. The movie's a prequel or origin story to the original Munsters series, predating the show and explaining how Herman and Lily first get together, which means we don't get to see two of the most well-known and beloved characters of the family, Eddie and Marilyn. It starts in Transylvania with a guy named Dr. Wolfgang and his assistant Floop robbing graves in an attempt to collect the body parts they need to create a genius Frankenstein monster. Meanwhile, Lily is living with Grandpa in their Transylvania mansion, and she's on the dating scene trying to find herself a new man, having no luck after boring unsuccessful meetups with characters like Nosferatu. Once Dr. Wolfgang's creation comes to life and he realizes he made a mistake in the process and accidentally gave it the brain of a corny, half-witted comedian rather than a genius, Herman Munster is essentially born. So for some reason, Herman instantly becomes a local celebrity comic and rock star, and after seeing him on TV, Lily decides to go meet him in person, where they basically instantly fall in love. Soon after, they get married, and while on their honeymoon, Grandpa's other child, Lester the Wolfman, manages to sell the deed to their mansion in order to resolve some sort of a gambling debt he has or something, and the person he sells the house to is apparently Grandpa's ex-wife who hates him, so he and Lily get evicted, causing them to move to Hollywood, where Herman thinks he can become a star. They buy the house from the show on Mockingbird Lane the week of Halloween, which allows them to fit in perfectly, and that's pretty much it. This movie definitely has problems that will most likely cause it not to resonate well with audiences, the way similar remakes like The Addams Family did back in the 90s, which was a huge success and still holds up to this day in my opinion. The main one is the fact that it was written by a guy who doesn't know how to write comedy. Rob Zombie. He's a horror director, and although we've seen other directors switch genres with great success, like Todd Phillips for example when he made Joker after being known for his hilarious comedy classics, unfortunately for Zombie this just didn't work the other way around. Being a Munsters mega fan wasn't enough for him to take the helm as a director and writer for this type of film, and I think a lot of the jokes just sort of fell flat or weren't there to begin with. Had he hired some great comedy writers to help with the script and actually make the dialogue funny, it probably would have stood a better chance at succeeding. But he unfortunately didn't, so a lot of it just came off kinda cringy. I think another thing that contributes to the lack of funny jokes is the PG rating and the fact that he tried to stay too close to the source material without fully capturing its magic. And even if he had, the show was popular over a half-century ago, so it's unlikely that anyone would find this entertaining today without updating it in some way for a modern audience, other than some boomers or kids too young to know what bad is that are just entertained by anything with bright colors and goofy characters. But like I said, the movie barely even resembles the original show, show outside of the look of the main three characters, so it's doubtful that even boomers or 90s kids who enjoyed the reruns on Nick at Night like I did would find this enjoyable or entertaining. I'm sure they had a bigger budget for the Addams Family movie, but at least it was given a PG-13 rating so they could include some dark humor that wasn't too mature for kids but also entertained adults whether you were a fan of the original 60s show or not. I was a Munsters fan as a kid but never watched the original Addams Family show, and I loved those movies. They had a modern and slightly darker tone than that of the original, which allowed them to stand out on their own, which is also true of other 90s movies which were remakes of shows from that era like Dennis the Menace or The Little Rascals. But Rob Zombie didn't go in that direction, and perhaps he should have, especially now that kids are so used to seeing more mature content through the internet and on streaming services. He probably should have strayed away from the family-friendly nature of the old show and made it slightly more dark for this project, because somehow this movie managed to be even cornier than the old show, which is probably its biggest problem. I find it hard to believe anyone older than the age of 7 would find this funny or appealing. Also, those 90s remakes featured stellar cast who seemed to take their roles seriously. Christina Ricci, Christopher Lloyd, Angelica Houston. In this movie, with the exception of Grandpa, who was pretty much on point, the actors seemed to be playing goofier versions of their characters, which weren't even necessarily that goofy to begin with back in the day. I don't know if this was poor casting or just poor direction, but every character spoke in this sort of cartoonish, over-the-top way when even the original characters in the show spoke and behaved relatively normally. They just looked odd. That was sort of what made the show funny back then. They were all monsters, but they pretty much behaved like normal people. Rob Zombie's wife Sherry Moon Zombie, who played Lily Munster, delivered all of her lines in this sort of fluttery way, and Herman Munster spoke in this sort of high-pitched squealing manner throughout the film.
Greetings from Transylvania!
Which is far from the way either character was portrayed by Fred Gwynne or Yvonne DiCarlo in the 60s. Gwynne's booming voice in the original Munsters is what made the character, so not having that element in this new version makes it hard to love this Herman Munster. Jeff Daniel Phillips, a longtime collaborator of Rob Zombie's who played the new Herman Munster in this movie, even said in an interview that he's not good at impressions, admitting this version of the character was nothing like the original, and although I don't think he necessarily needed to do an exact impression, he could have done something that was at least impressive, like Christina Ricci did with her much different but iconic version of Wednesday Addams. Unfortunately, Phillips just wasn't able to accomplish this, and I'm honestly sad to say that I think casting him might have been a mistake. I really just feel bad for everyone involved in this project because I'm sure they put a lot of heart into it and really wanted it to be great, but you can tell even when reading interviews that they know the kind of movie they made, and on some level they're probably as disappointed as the audience is going to be. Even Netflix didn't promote this on the front page of their site the very day it was released. I had to search for it just to find it. And finally, the reason I think the Addams Family remakes will continue to be remembered as classics while this movie will be quickly forgotten is because they had a good story. But in the Munsters, things just sort of happen. Nothing really keeps you engaged or interested in finding out what's going to happen next. It's kind of just that mindless type of entertainment that you watch to kill time. The movie presents itself like a campy B-movie but with a larger budget, almost like they spent more money than necessary to make it look low budget, because visually it looks kind of expensive. The sets and costumes are really cool, but they also included these moments that are just the cast standing in front of a green screen or black wall with cheesy lighting effects behind them, done in a way where the cheesiness is intentionally part of the movie's aesthetic. But on a positive note, I can say that as well as the costumes and sets, the lighting was also well done, giving most scenes this cool, cartoonish Halloween vibe with bright purple, green, and red colors that contrast with one another and put you in a Halloween mood, which is obviously the point of the movie. So in that regard, I'd say it was a success, because I think if you were just looking for a family-friendly Halloween movie you can watch with your kids to celebrate the season, then you can get some value out of this. But overall, I unfortunately have to rate this movie as a solid D. So what did you think of it? Did you like it? Hate it? Were you ever a fan of the original show? Let us all know in the comments, and thanks to anyone who subscribed and shared or clicked like on this video. Feel free to check out the rest of the channel for more Culturgeist content. I'll see y'all there, and until then, live well and take it easy. Later.